Hello and welcome to SweetSpotDFS. This is a DFS review video for the 2021 RBC Heritage. Now, before we actually get in the video, I'll remind you there are timestamps in the description below. Also on YouTube, you can find those timestamps in the progress bar. But what I usually like to cover in these videos is basically go over what I did in the preview and strategy video and see what went right and what went wrong. So again, timestamps in the description below. Let's go ahead and get into this thing. I'm going to pull up the results page. Stewart Cink is your winner. It marks his second win on tour this season, his 8th in his career, and his 3rd at the RBC Heritage. It just goes to show that this type of tournament, this golf course, is a horses for courses type of tournament. Webb Simpson usually does well in this tournament. He finished top 10 here. He also finished second last year. Stewart Cink, obviously 2 wins prior to this win, has done well here. Wesley Bryan was doing really well for a while. I believe when we get into the optimal lineup versus GPP winning lineup, Wesley Bryan I think is like 15th, somewhere in the top 15 for DraftKings points. He plays this golf course really well. Daniel Berger, Brian Harmon. There's a lot of guys that have played this tournament well in the past that just continuously play well here. So obviously going forward, I think we already knew that though. This is definitely a horses for courses type of golf course. But I mean, to talk about Stewart Cink a little bit, he pretty much put this tournament away after Saturday's round. I think he had a 5-shot lead. I think he was at 18 under, and the next guy was 13 under, which I believe was Morikawa. I can't remember, but basically, as long as Cink didn't play really poorly on Sunday, he wasn't going to relinquish his lead, and he didn't. So no one really made a charge that was close enough to him, and he was able to basically fend off everyone, which wasn't. I mean, it wasn't going to be difficult. So Cink won this tournament pretty easy. It was very anticlimactic, but that's okay. I mean, we don't need to have drama every single week. Cink is if you did watch any of the broadcast, it was fun watching him. His son caddies for him. His whole family was there. They kept, showing shots of them. It was super enjoyable. Very wholesome. It was cool. So cool for Stewart Cink. Let's go ahead and get into the optimal lineup versus the GPP winning lineup. And if you've been here a while, you know that I have collaborated with the guys at Fantasy Golf Pod, primarily Chad Eckert, but his co-host Eric Martins almost took down this $1 GPP that I'm going to be covering. He was 2 points away from winning it. And the joke is, the putt that Siwoo Kim had on the lip that they were watching move. I'm not sure exactly if it was, but that putt, had it dropped, probably would have propelled Eric to winning this tournament. Unfortunately, it didn't. But it still was a very good weekend for him. I mean, I don't know how much he profited, but it looked pretty large after Saturday's round, after round 3. I only imagine he just did better because I believe he moved up in the short game, which is this $1 GPP. And not back. But anyways, congratulations, Eric. That was awesome. Moving on, the optimal lineup, every golfer that has a little black tick mark is representing the optimal lineup, except for Cameron Smith down here. The $1 GPP winning lineup are all these golfers highlighted in blue. So that's Stewart Cink, Emiliano Grillo, Matthew Fitzpatrick, Cameron Smith, Shane Lowry, and Billy Horschel, who finished 25th. So this guy had all of his golfers, except for one, inside the top 10. And usually, as I discuss in a lot of my videos, especially for the preview and strategy, we want as many guys inside the top 10. We at least want 5, if not all 6. So this guy had 5. And he used $50,000 of the salary. 598 points he scored. Now, the optimal lineup had Stewart Cink, Emiliano Grillo, Harold Varner III, Maverick McNeely, Matthew Fitzpatrick, and Corey Connors. So the guy who won the $1 GPP had 3 of the 6 guys in the optimal lineup, which is pretty good. It's respectable. But if you wanted the optimal lineup, you had to leave $3,900 on the table. That's unrealistic. You know me, you know what I've been covering recently. Yeah, I'm definitely a seeker of the optimal lineup, and I forever will be, but there is a little bit of realism that has to come with it. To leave $3,900 on the table, you want to know how many more combinations of lineups that you can build, as opposed to shrinking that down and only trying to find lineups that, you know, leave no more than, say, $1,000 on the table. So we're looking for anything 49,000 and up. The amount of lineups you can create only with 49,000 to 50,000, it's going to be a lot easier to figure out than trying to leave $3,900 on the table. So for me, it's great to see the optimal lineup, but it's not something that I'm really trying to achieve. Not leaving that much money on the table, that is. The optimal lineup did score 646 points. The $1 GPP, again, 598. So there's, you know, close to 50 points that separate those two. What I like to do is basically create a realistic lineup. And I think what I want to call it is just an optimal lineup, 49,000 and above. That's what I'm trying to do. I want to try to find something 49,000 above. The optimal lineup has no, or not optimal lineup. The optimizer that I use has no issue leaving money on the table. I try to get it as close to 50,000 as I possibly can, because it obviously just makes it easier. But if I'm creating a realistic lineup, I want to see who those guys can be. So basically, what I have here under Cameron Smith's name is replace Maverick McNeely with Smith for the realistic lineup. And that would be, you know, Cam Smith, Corey Connors, Matt Fitzpatrick, Harold Varner III, Emiliano Grillo, and Stuart Sink. This equals 49,600. This is a much easier lineup to get to. Again, it has everybody inside the top 10. And if we wanted to double check the points scored, could we have taken down that $1 GPP? If we check all the points, it scores 629.5 points. That is 30 points over what the $1 GPP winning lineup was. And really, it's only 16 points, 15 points. Yeah, it's close to 16 and a half points below the optimal lineup. So yeah, we could get there pretty easy. The only thing in question, really, and this is what I failed to do in past review videos, is basically when I cover the bucket system, I kind of give you rules that you should follow by. Let's check what those rules are. So just to go over the bucket system, let's break it down a different way. Usually what I say is like the minimum is the least amount of times you want to play a golfer, or, you know, out of a bucket. So if that golfer has that bucket score next to him, you want to play him, you know, the minimum time, not that golfer, but you want to play from this bucket or any of these buckets shown here, what's highlighted on the screen in front of you. So the last year bucket 2 golfers, we want at least 2 of them. And here's what I'm going to do. We're going to go to the 2021 DK page. I'm going to highlight or sort by position. And actually, let's just get rid of all of them except for the top 10 golfers. Because again, I'm only interested in the top 10. So we got rid of the rest of the guys. Let's look at all their bucket scores here and try to figure, did the rules apply? And if so, could we have created a lineup out of them? Because that's the issue I find week in and week out is, oh yeah, the bucket system does apply, but it wouldn't beat the $1 GPP, or we can't roster all of them because they're over $50,000. So let's double check that right now. So when we look, our first rule is you want to play at least 2 last year 2s. Go to the 2021. Let's go into the last year 2 bucket. Let's go ahead and hide the rest since that we don't really need to look at that. So we're looking at for last year 2s. Never mind. I'm going to open this back up. Hopefully you guys don't get confused here. But of all these guys here, do we see at least 2 last year 2s? Yes, we do. We see Matt Fitzpatrick and Webb Simpson. Okay, check. That works out. So basically, just looking at the last year buckets, let's go ahead and highlight these guys because we're going to anchor our lineups around those guys and see if we can get to closer lineups. All right, so the next one is also from the last year bucket. Last year bucket 1, we want at least one of the last year bucket 1s. Can we do that? We sure can. There is Chris Kirk right here. He is a last year 1. Obviously, if you highlight this column here. He's right there. So let's go ahead and highlight him. Let me get rid of some of these. So now we have 3 golfers. The rules are lining up pretty nicely. Now let's go ahead, go back into the summary. Now that last year's been done, let's look at last week. Oh, last week ones. Let's double check if any of the 3 golfers we have were last week one. Chris Kirk was. So that's another check mark. And obviously when you go to the summary, we want 2 of them. So I need to find another one. So Chris Kirk, and let's go with Emiliano Grillo, because I mean, we might change it, but since he is in the optimal lineup, he's second place, we can go ahead because he was a last week one, as you can see here. Him and Kirk last week one. So right now, last year, last week, those check the boxes. Absolutely works. Go back to the summary. Now, here's where it kind of gets a little dicey. Course history 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, those buckets, we want 2 course history 1s and then 1 of the other following. So let's see what we can do there. Let's go ahead and look for our course history 1. We want to find 2 of those guys. Can we do it? That's a negative. And if we go back to the summary and just take a look at course history 1s, those are golfers who did not play the year before. We usually see 27 of them in any given year. This year we only had 15. And we discussed this in the preview video. Because of COVID last year, this was the second tournament back in rotation from the 90-day suspension, basically, of play because of COVID. The tournament prior to this was the Charles Schwab Classic Challenge, the Charles Schwab Challenge, and let's put it a different way. That isn't necessarily, that would be talking about last year buckets, but course history buckets. Let's get, okay. The reason why this number is lower than what we see typically is there was no graduation, no Korn Ferry graduation. There weren't players that lost their tour card like there typically is. Usually it's the top 125 in the FedEx Cup points that make it to the next year. Those that didn't fall within the 125 and aren't a part of any other exemptions, they lose their card. So like there are ways that if someone does not fit inside the top 125 by the end of the year, that they can still retain their tour card for different reasons. But for the most part, nearly 70 or like somewhere between 60 to 70 guys lose their tour card. And that with that, a new flux of guys come in from the Korn Ferry and other, I can't remember exactly how or where, but they will come in and replace them. And with that, we get a bunch of golfers who've never played this tournament before. That's why you see like course history did not plays. That means they had not played the tournament prior to. Well, if we only have 15 for this year, and on average we see 27, this kind of tells that, yeah, it's a very good bucket to select from, but just having that little amount, the 12 less than we do on average, is enough to bring this bucket down to 0. And I kind of warned about that in the preview video. So it doesn't surprise me that we don't see anyone that was a course history 1 inside the top 10. But at the same time, it kind of is a little disappointing. I think when I said I think we'll at least see 1. Because when I did cover in the preview, I anticipated this, these 2 numbers would go down. I believe we were going to see a minimum 1, maybe a max of 3. I think that's exactly what I said. But obviously this year, 0. We have 0 course history 1s. So that kind of goes out that does not work. But for the other buckets, 2, 3, we don't see a 4, so 4 doesn't work either, but we do see 5s. We see a bunch of 5s. There are 2s, 3s, and 5s. That's what dominates this. But you can see there's no 6s. And if we look, I can't remember. I think 6s were 60 to 80. 60s were missed cuts and greater. So yeah, we don't see any 6s, which is kind of a rule of mine. I don't ever play 6s, or I try at the very least to limit my exposure of 5s and 6s. But anyways, so the course history buckets did not work that well. And when I update this, course history 1, the min is going to go down to 0. And also for course history 4, the min will go down to 0 as well. There were only 6 golfers in that bucket this year. On average, we see 8.5. I don't think that's, a significant enough number that it's really going to matter. So this bucket kind of was, the success rate was really high. So I want to take a look. Who were those golfers? I'm going to open this back up to everybody, and let's take a look at who the course history 4 golfers were. Kuchar, Cantlay. So Cantlay was the huge disappointment. So was Sergio. I liked both of these guys. And part of the reason why I didn't do that well this week was because I went heavy on Sergio. And I did like Poulter quite a bit. Because Poulter kind of floundered on Saturday and Sunday's round, that really limited me from doing well at all. But yeah, I didn't play a lot of Cantlay, but I did play a lot of Sergio. And didn't do that great, obviously. He missed the cut. Missed the cut by 1, I believe. Had a bunch of doubles on Friday, which, what can you do? So not the greatest selection of golfers to choose from. Cantlay was good, but I didn't really like Cantlay this week, so I didn't play a lot of them. I should have probably understood that bucket wasn't going to do that great just by the players that were in it. That's something I have to always double check week in and week out. So course history bucket, that was a long-winded explanation of it not doing well, but yeah, it did not perform. This obviously is going to change, as well as this one. And just for the mins, though, the minimums, there won't be a rule to play at least one of them for next year's tournament. But yeah, that one didn't do well, but we can move on to the recent form, 1, 2, and 3. So our recent form 3, we want to find at least 2 of those guys. So if we go in here, if we remember, Chris Kirk was one of our guys, Webb Simpson, and Emiliano Grillo, and Matt Fitzpatrick, right? Because he was the last year too. So recent form 3s, we want to find at least 2 of those guys. We have one here, and we have one here. Webb Simpson's another guy. So we already have recent form bucket 3 covered. And again, that would be this one. We want to play a minimum of 2, a max of 5. That works. Recent form bucket 1 and 2, we want 1 of. Let's go ahead and see if we can find those guys. So 1 and 2. We have 4 golfers we've already chosen. And I think what I'm going to do is get rid of Emiliano Grillo and put in Sink and put in Harold Varner. Because we do need that recent form 1, and Harold Varner gives us that. We have Matt Fitzpatrick here. So I'm just highlighting everybody that we have. We wanted the last week 1s. We wanted 2 of them, so Varner gives us that. We chose Emiliano Grillo because he did have that for us. But when we look at our recent form buckets, we want at least 1 recent form 1. Now we want a recent form 2. There's only one guy that solves that for us, and that's Maverick McNeely. So these, the bucket system did not work entirely because of the course history buckets. But again, if we're being logical, it didn't work because, there are numbers in some of these course history buckets that are lower than their average, and that's why they didn't perform as well. The ones that did perform well, if we look at just course history, are the ones that have a higher number of golfers in their bucket for this year compared to their average. So 3, 2, and 5, we can see that the number for this year is much larger than the average. The ones that did not do well are actually lower. So there's a perfectly reasonable explanation as to why they didn't show up. And really, it was just those 2 buckets that didn't show up. But for everything else, everything hit the mark. Let's go ahead and tally up these guys. So we want Webb, Chris Kirk, Matt McNeely, Matt Fitzpatrick, Harold Varner III, and Stuart Sink. We do need the winner. You typically need the winner. I can go ahead and tally up those points from here. Altogether, that would score 616 points. So if we look at the 2021 GPP winning lineup, 598, we scored 616 with that lineup I just created. We win the GPP. When it comes to price tag, how would that look? So we want Webb, Fitz, Eric Varner, Chris Kirk. Let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You guys are yelling at me like, it's that guy. Who did we select? It was Webb, Fitzpatrick, McNeely, Kirk, Stu, and okay, so I think it's McNeely, right? Correct. That's 47,700. We're not getting there with the price tag. So that, unfortunately, if we follow all the buckets, all the bucket rules, does not really apply that well. The lineup that I did talk about earlier, that would get there, it was Cam Smith that we would select with the top 5 guys. We replaced Maverick McNeely, so it would be these 5 guys. And that was 49.6. What do we really lose out on? We lose out on one of the last year 2s with Webb. So basically now we're, so it'd be these guys, or that would be the bucket scores there. We're also replacing Chris Kirk, so we're not doing Kirk. It'd be everybody here. So let's see. We have our 2 last week 1s that we need to cover. For last year, we don't have a 1. We only have 1, 2. So really last year buckets we're not following completely either. For recent form buckets, we don't have a recent form bucket 2 guy, so we're not following that one completely, but we have our 3s and our 1s covered. And course history bucket, we don't have anyone that was a 1, but of course the 1s didn't show up. We have our 2 course history 2s that I think we wanted, right? Oh, that was the messy bucket, the 2, 3, 4, 5. So let's see here. Course history 2, 5, 2. I guess you're not going to be able to see it. So it's just a bunch of 2s and 5s that would be in our group. So yeah, the course history bucket wouldn't follow either. So although we can say other than course history bucket 1 and 4, all the buckets fulfilled their quote unquote rules. We just can't create lineups with all those rules. And therefore, that's something that needs to be considered, when building these lineups. I think it's a good way to identify golfers that we want to anchor our lineups around, but trying to follow those rules all the way through, probably not the greatest. That's why whenever you hear me during the strategy video in talking about the optimizer, I really just want to go by the maximum. That's about it. I don't want to make sure that I have 1 or 2 of these guys. It's all about looking at the maximum. So that's obviously what I do in the strategy videos. And I think I'm going to further, when we go over these, just make sure that, I guess I'm going to make sure I don't tell you guys that you need to play golfers with these bucket scores. And I'm sure most of you guys aren't, but in the future, I just want to make sure that that's not what we're doing. But anyways, that was the bucket system. What we looked at prior to the start of the tournament and how it ended up. It wasn't terrible. I wish maybe in the future I'll update these with this year's, or after the tournament's ended with the results, just to see, but I kind of need to do a before and after so you guys can see that. So I think this was decent. So we kind of went over the bucket system. One thing we didn't, there's that additional thing that I always talk about called strokes gained buckets. If you're with me in the strategy videos and you follow along, I basically rank these buckets based off of the positive stats that I cover. So if everything is positive, all the strokes gained positive, they're strokes gained bucket 1. Then you can see what the other headers are here. Strokes gained 2, positive off the tee, positive putting. That means there's either a negative approach stat or a negative around the green stat. That's basically what this bucket, how it differs from this one. Positive off the tee, negative putting is 3. 4 is negative off the tee, positive putting. 5 is negative off the tee, negative putting. And then 6 are no strokes gained. I always say this, always avoid the golfers that are in this bucket. And as you can see, the best placing guy was Ryan Moore, finished 52nd. So if you were on Ryan Moore, hopefully you came here and saw, oh, he's a strokes gained bucket 6 golfer. Let's just refrain from using him. But as we look across, strokes gained 5, arguably the second worst strokes gained bucket. Only 2 guys finished inside the top 20, nobody inside the top 10. So you basically could have avoided all of these guys, and there are 28 golfers in that bucket. There are 7 guys in this bucket, so 35 golfers we could just remove. So now we're only looking at like 100 guys that were in the field to choose from. But as we continue looking, over to from left to right, or we're actually going right to left, strokes gained bucket 4 only had 2 guys inside the top 10, and they happen to be in my realistic lineup. So Cam Smith, 10,200, he was the highest priced guy in this bucket. So if you wanted to anchor a lineup around that, that's a good way to start. And then if you didn't mind having Stuart Sink in here, I think that's great. I also have my rules here, pick 0 to 2. 2 guys were your maximum, and 2 guys obviously would have led you to the promised land. So those 2 guys, perfect. Going to strokes gained bucket 3, look at how many top 10s there were here. We had 5. Dustin Johnson almost finished inside the top 10. He was a shot away from doing that, but he had a really good Sunday round. Other than that, he was kind of non-existent. But anyways, 5 guys from this bucket. That's pretty good. But if we go to strokes gained bucket 2, we only had 1 guy in the top 10, but a bunch of guys in the top 20. And then strokes gained bucket 1, we had 4 guys that were inside the top 10. And really, for me, whenever I create lineups, I usually like to start here and pick a guy that I really like. Webb was my guy. I anchored, so I didn't anchor lineups, but for ownership percentage, I did have him in that 24% range. So I wanted to own 24% of him. Will Zalatoris was another guy that I wanted to own a lot. And he had a pretty decent Thursday, Friday, but then just, I don't know if it was fatigue or what, but did not play well on the weekend. He fell to 42nd place. But yeah, I could have probably went with, any of the higher priced guys in this bucket. I told you I wasn't that high on Cantlay, but if I were to, anchor my lineups around the 10K guys in all these different buckets, I would have been just fine. And I usually like to do that, going with all these 10K guys in different buckets. I think that's what I'm going to do going forward. This was the strokes gained buckets. You can also see their strokes gained scores here inside the top 10. You can see there's a bunch of 1s. There's 1, 2. There's a few 3s. And there's only 2 4s. So strokes gained buckets, if you followed those rules, it worked out well. The one additional piece I want to talk about is salaries. And I usually don't talk about this in the review video, but if you're with me in the preview, we cover salaries to show you what salaries show up inside the top 10 a bit more than usual. I don't have this updated for 2021. You can see the years that I have, but for, looking at this as a total prior to 2021, you could see nothing really 11K and above proved to be fruitful. And it didn't this year either. We had nobody inside the top 10, but DJ did finish 13th. So we'll have somebody an additional guy inside the top 20. So this percentage will go up, but these will still stay at 0. So we kind of knew we wanted to fade DJ, although he played really well on Sunday, not good enough. And he wasn't in the optimal lineup, so it doesn't matter. The 10 to 11K, where I was just talking about anchoring our lineups, I don't know exactly if that, although I say anchoring my lineups, I'm not sure I would do that 100% of my lineups. I usually like to play these percentages just to double check. Now, over the last 3 years, 2020 to 2018, there's only been 10 guys that have been in that 10K to 11K range. And of those 10 guys, only 1 finished inside the top 5. And 30% finished inside the top 10, which is usually what I'm going off of. So that's pretty good. 3 guys of, all of the top 10s. to me, what I like to do is I like to use the percentages with that. So if I bring in everybody and I sort from top to bottom for salary, this is your group. We're going to add 5 more golfers to that group. And then what was there? Just 10 prior to that? That is what I have. I want to double check these numbers. Sure. 2020, sure. Guess we've had quite a few 11K golfers. 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Okay. So yeah, we did have 10. But yeah, what I like to do is basically 30% of top 10. So we had 5. So it's not a perfect number. I would probably really only select 2 of these guys and anchor my lineups around them. And if we did that, obviously, Cam Smith wasn't our realistic lineup. I suppose we didn't want anybody that was 10K and above. Cam Smith is the only guy that did prove to be worthwhile. But if we looked at our optimal lineups every single year, if you were to go back to the review video, or the preview video, I should say, and look at that, we knew we didn't want double 10K guys. Like, you didn't want to have 2 10K and above guys on your lineup. You just wanted one, but you really wanted at least one 9K guy and one 8K guy in your lineups. Or it was like you wanted one 9K, one 8K. Or no. It was 2 9Ks, one 8K, or one 9K, 2 8Ks. I think that's how it went. Obviously, we don't see anybody 8K that was in the optimal lineup. But we did have 2 guys that did finish inside the $1 GPP winning lineup, so that was fine. Yeah, I mean, the optimal lineup was dominated by 6K and 7K guys. We did know we wanted one 6K guy. How did it go? I should store this information somewhere. If I put this, I mean, we had all of our 9Ks here in 2020 and 8Ks. Let's see. Was there a 6K in that? There was not. For this, we had a 9, 8, 6. Actually, this was part of the realistic lineup. That's right. So it was replacing who? Shane Lowry, who was 6'5" with an 8'6" guy. But yeah, it was an 8K, 9K, a 10K. That's not the same in 2020. What was our realistic lineup? Did we have one? I think this was what, 50,000, 49.9 for optimal lineup. So there wasn't any way to change that really. Yeah, I think like maybe having a Michael Thompson in there. I don't think there's a way to get there. Yeah, I can't remember what we talked about in the preview. So I think last year was kind of a weird one. It's probably really just proving out to be that it's so volatile that there's no way to actually know. I think my realistic lineup was right here. So we had 2 9Ks, 2 8Ks, a 7 and a 6 in 2018 and 2019, a 10, a 9, an 8, 7 and 2 6s. And then 2020 was a bunch of 9s, 8s, and 7s. Yeah, so it was 8 6, 8, 8 9, 8, 9, and 7 4. One of the craziest balanced lineups you will ever see. Yeah, I felt like I covered, so it was 9, 8, maybe it was 8 again. This is under the salary cap, as is this. This is 49,800. So it was Fratelli, DeChambeau. So there would have been a 10, 9, 2 8s, a 7, and a 6. 743.5 is what we have to beat. $704. So no, we would not have beaten the Millie Maker lineup. Well, the Millie Maker lineup was the optimal lineup, right? So you had to have the optimal lineup. Anyways, just trying to figure out, what the optimal lineup, just trying to remember what I talked about in the preview. I'm sorry for wasting your guys' time with that. But yeah, I don't like to go to, so circling back to what we were talking about, it was all about the salaries with the 10K, because the percentage isn't that high of finishing inside the top 10 or even in the top 20. I didn't want to invest that much of my lineups with the 10K golfer. And although we do have 3 guys that finished inside the top 10, which, probably should make you feel, comfortable in the fact with tournaments going forward to anchor your lineups with somebody in the 10K range. It was the 9K and the 8K range that, to me, prior to this, you wanted to focus your lineups around. And obviously we had 2 guys in the 9K range in the optimal lineup. So that worked out. Nobody in the 8K that really was in the optimal lineup. Your next guy would have been 7,300. But obviously we talked about that realistic lineup, right? Which would have been a 10K guy, 2 9K guys, 2 7K guys, and a 6K guy. So maybe that's how we have to think about this tournament. Either you select 2 9s, a 9 and an 8, or 2 8s to go with the 10K guy. That's probably my thought process, what I'm going to do going forward for this tournament. That was way longer than it needed to be, but I'm glad that if you stuck around with me all the way to this point, it was worth talking out. Let's go ahead and talk about the SweetSpot score really quickly. So my number 1 guy was Webb Simpson. He finished 9th place, not terrible. Number 2 was Paul Casey. He missed the cut. 3 is DJ. 4 is Sergio. He missed the cut. But as a whole, I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 golfers who missed the cut inside the top 20 for SweetSpot score. You can see Billy Horschel rounds that out. And how many top 10s? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 top 10s. So that matches our missed cuts, but then you can see there's a bunch of top 20s in there as well. Now, for price tags, obviously anything over, say, 9K, you really can't have too many of. So Matthew Fitzpatrick, 9,100, he finished 4th, perfect. Cam Smith, 10-2, he finished 9th, that's great. I suppose these were in our realistic lineup. Corey Connors, Fitzpatrick, and Smith. Those 3 guys, they would be in that realistic lineup. As I scrolled down, is there anybody else? Emiliano Grillo was 35th. That's pretty good for 7,300. Stuart Sink was actually 46th in the model. Was he the top 6K guy? I don't think so. Let's see, less than or equal to 6,900. He was actually my 5th ranked guy, the 5th best guy in the 6K range for me. My number 1 guy was Chase Seifert. Gordon, Snedeker, and Kazire all followed right after him. I kind of went heavy on Kazire, Gordon, and Seifert. Unfortunately, like Stuart Sink, because he was a last year 6, kind of got me off of him. He was in my dummy lineups. I should say placeholder lineups. Because when I first looked over it, I can't remember what bucket I chose from, but I'm like, oh, we need this, we need that, we need this, we need that. I think it was from the last year bucket, if I'm being honest. Or maybe it was from the strokes game bucket. I can't remember. But either way, he was there, and when I ran the optimizer, he just wasn't. So unfortunately, that didn't work out. But yeah, Maverick McNeely was 78th in my SweetSpot score. That was way too far down. that I would have felt comfortable playing. So SweetSpot Score as a whole, not terrible. I do like seeing more top 10s, top 20s than missed cuts. So that is kind of a victory in my book. But yeah, not that big of a deal. All right. So the next piece of, or the last thing in this video that I want to cover, basically is looking at stats. So I'm going to cover the top 20 in the relevant stats. So we're going to sort for course history, top to bottom, look at the results here, the finishing position, see how many top 10s there are. That's the only thing I'm going to care about within the top 20 of each stat. So we're going to start with course history. We only have one guy who finished top 10 for course history. So I did say when I opened the show this is a very good golf course for horses for courses. But obviously, looking at the course history that we have, in front of you right now, that doesn't really bode well for that type of thought process. Yeah, I mean, inside the top 20 here, and it's the top 20 of the stat. Inside the top 20 of that stat, it didn't really work out that well. Now, we weren't sure if this was POA or if this was Bermuda, but we have 1, 2, 3 guys that finished inside the top 10, but way too many missed cuts to really consider this to be that great. The other thing I like to do is look at finishing position, and I don't want to roster anybody that's 5% or lower when it comes to this grass stat. So there's 2 guys there. Both of them end up being inside the optimal lineup. So that kind of sucks. That doesn't work out for us. But for the most part, inside the top 10, everybody was 5% or greater. Again, I wasn't sure if this was POA or if this was Bermuda. What I ended up finding out throughout the tournament, watching it, is that it's a mix. It is a hybrid of, I don't even know what the percentage that I put on it. Probably 40% Bermuda, 60% POA. It's got to be in its own category. Like, it just does not work looking at pure POA stats, and I don't think it really works looking at pure Bermuda stats. So grass stats, we're going to have to revisit this for next year. It didn't really work that well this year. And then when we look at overall Pete Dye averages, if I go ahead and sort top to bottom, we have only one guy that finished inside the top 10. Now, when we're looking at top 20s, pretty even between top 20s and missed cuts. So I'm not terrible there. But again, if we sort by finishing position and just look at our top 10s, we have 1, 2, 3, 4 golfers that had 0%. Actually, let's do it a different way. 5, 6 guys who are below that 5% or greater that I wanted to select from. So this did not work out that well. Definitely can't really do that going forward. And obviously I knew it was one of those things that you probably couldn't do anyways. But yeah, those stats there didn't really prove out to be that beneficial this week. Going to season-long stats. So strokes gained, tee to green. Let's sort best to worst. Okay, tee to green looks like it played pretty well. We see a bunch of guys here inside the top 10. In fact, that would make 8 guys inside the top 10. 1, 2, 3, 4 missing the cut. So tee to green stats, that was a good way to start. As was off the tee. Off the tee was pretty good. We had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. This guy would be inside the top 20. 6 missed cuts. 1, 2, 3, 4 top 10s. But then you add the other, top 20s, and it equals 8. So we had more top 20s than we had missed cuts. Off the tee, pretty good stat. Here's a good one. Approach. Most of you guys probably went heavy on approach. That's why it got you guys on like people like Colin Morikawa. But, Matt Wallace was doing pretty well for a while. And, you don't have the winner up here, which is fine. You do have one guy in the optimal lineup, so obviously that worked out well. But for the most part, it was pretty even. Like if I scroll down just a little bit, I think Grillo was what was he, 21st or 22nd in the stat in the field. So all in all, approach. If you went by approach and you went heavy, if you didn't have these guys here, which I don't even know if you can make a Yeah, 54,600. You couldn't even create a lineup with these top guys. You weren't winning money. You didn't have first place in there. You didn't have second or third place. I mean, you could have scrolled down and got Grillo at 22 or 22nd within the approach stats, but couldn't really do it by approach. Strokes gained around the green. Yeah, you see a bunch of missed cuts. We do see some top 10s though, so it's doable. And you see some of the guys inside the winning GPP lineup, and one guy that was in the optimal lineup. Around the green, not the greatest one to go by. How about putting? And putting wasn't a stat that really mattered either. So, and I know a lot of people don't go by putting. It's very volatile, yada, yada, yada. But for the most part, selecting putters with off the tee, for me, I think is a smart thing to go by. So yeah, those are your top 20s of those stats. Let's just go quickly. Driving distance, does that matter? Not really. Driving accuracy. Hey, we got a bunch of people here that are green. Probably just as many missed cuts as we see top 10 finishes, but a pretty decent number of top 10 finishes. How about good drive percentage? This is like how smart they are making drives. That's pretty good. So good drive percentage was a fantastic stat to go by. There was 3 guys in the optimal lineup. I don't think if you went with like a Bryce Garnett at 6,400, he didn't really hurt you. Matthew Neesmith, not the greatest. Yeah, good drive percentage was a good stat to go by for sure. How about bogey avoidance? So we want to look. Pretty good mix. I think it's pretty even of top 10s and missed cuts. Definitely more top 20s than missed cuts, but yeah, it's not a bad stat. And birdie or better, another good stat. So these were stats that we actually used in the SweetSpot score. So that's probably why we had a pretty good showing. I suppose we didn't use. Oh yeah, we did use good drive percentage, bogey avoidance, and birdie or better. So yeah, that's probably why the SweetSpot score did as well as it did. All in all, again, it was a bad week for me just playing DraftKings, but it's good to see these stats afterwards. I need to definitely come up with a game plan when it comes to building lineups. It's definitely one of my weakest weakest points with this whole DFS experience. I have all the stats that can back up why golfers are top 10s or top 20s or whatever, but it's all about putting the right combination together. And when I do use the optimizer I use, it's first starting with the most optimal lineup, and then it's breaking down ownership and stuff like that from there. I feel like I'm going to miss a lot if I don't set in my first 10 lineups. If I don't hand make my first 10 lineups, the optimizer is probably going to select 3 guys that are going to be really good, including guys in the 6K range and the 7K range, but it's going to mix them up with the wrong 10K guys. And based off their ownerships, I might not see one of those 6K guys until they get paired up with another bad duo. So really, it's running the optimizer, seeing who the best 6K, 7K guys are, and then from there, well, I think it's mostly I'm gonna go back to that 30-30-30-10 strategy, and I really don't care. For this week, it was difficult for me. Like, I just didn't know what guys I wanted to anchor my lineups around. So that 30-30-30-10 strategy of mine is 30% of my golfers or 30% of my lineups will have 2 guys anchored to those lineups. So they will be in all 30% of those lineups. And then obviously I do that with the next 30% and the next 30%. So I need to find a core of 6 guys to build my lineups around. This week I just couldn't do it. I mean, like, I looked, I usually start with strokes gained buckets and try to select guys from here to go along with anyone from here, strokes gained bucket 2, 3, or 4. And I usually like to start at the 10K or 11K. I didn't like DJ this week, so he wouldn't have been a part of my core. I also didn't like Morikawa. I know a lot of you guys did, but I just didn't want him to be a part of my core because he was a last year 6. And he ended up not being in the optimal lineup, and he didn't end up being inside the GPP winning lineup. So I mean, obviously he finished 7th. I think when we look at DraftKings points in total, he was 13th best for DraftKings points. Wesley Bryan was actually better than I thought. He was 8th in DraftKings points. But yeah, that's why I didn't care for Morikawa. You can make the argument at 10,500 that's not good enough, which I would make that argument that it wasn't good enough to win you a GPP. So yeah, I didn't like Morikawa. I didn't like DJ. So when I look at my strokes gained bucket 3 guys, I mean, it was like Garcia, but I also didn't feel comfortable, anchoring any of my lineups around Garcia. So I skipped strokes gained bucket 3, looked at strokes gained bucket 2. I didn't like Daniel Berger that well either. So I couldn't find the right pieces to do that 30-30-30-10 strategy. So I didn't. I did go by ownership, and I think Tyrrell Hatton as well as Will Zalatoris were my highest owned golfers. And that didn't turn out that well. Obviously, you see Tyrrell Hatton finished 39th, Will Zalatoris finished 42nd. And then outside of that, Webb was my next guy. So Webb Simpson at 10,700, just like Morikawa, you can make the argument that's not good enough. And I think if we look at the points, if we try to find Webb Simpson, I think we got to scroll down a little bit to find Webb. Let's see, where is he? Right here. On DraftKings points, he was 23rd in the field. So Webb was not a good guy to anchor your lineups around. In fact, I mean, you needed the 2 9K guys right here, and you wanted them on your team together. So these guys, if you were to anchor them, let's say I did 30% of my lineups with these guys, I'm looking good. And I think I need to think of that, but chances are I don't know if I'm going to get here. I might go Fitzpatrick with Cam Smith, which wouldn't be terrible, but not great at the same time. I just don't know how I would get there. I don't know if this would have been a combination of golfers I would have done. So I have to rethink how I put these lineups together. I have to rethink. I do. I've seen strategies out there, including Eric Martin's having 100% of one guy. What that ends up doing is now the combinations of lineups you can create diminish that much by removing one lineup spot from your lineups. If it is covered by one guy, it's like it makes it that much simpler in creating lineups. And especially if you're following like the bucket system or anything like that, it's going to make it super easy to do stuff like that. So I'm going to toy around with that. I'm going to try to figure it out. In the meantime, I'm also going to... I missed a goal of mine, which was having my database created before the Masters. I'll say this, we're 1 week removed from the Masters and I'm really close. So I'm still working on it. And what this is going to do is provide me a better way of giving you guys information, as well as hopefully in the future, having some kind of service where you guys can also look at all this information, which will include the buckets, I envision it's going to be great. It might just be a dream, but I think it's a dream worth having. So I'm going to continue doing that, but I will have a preview video and a strategy video for the Zurich Classic. And if you weren't familiar with the Zurich Classic as of 2018 and beyond, or 2018 to future, present day, I should say, it's become a team event. So it is a team of 2 golfers, basically battling all other duos in the field. One day, I believe it's best ball, and the other day is alternate shot. So it's an interesting way to play golf. And I haven't looked at the data yet. I'm not sure how we're going to benefit from it, but I believe we're going to be able to determine the best duos to play with based off of buckets, based off of strategies, stuff like that. And actually there is an additional strategy that goes with it. So I advise you guys to pay attention to those preview videos as well as those strategy videos, because they're going to have some good pieces of information in it. But that's all I got. This went, man, I could have ended this at like 35 minutes. I looked down at 35 minutes and I was like, well, what else am I going to talk about as I'm doing this? And now we're here at 55. So 54, but it'll be 55 before I end. Anyways, I'm going to end it here. Thank you guys for watching. Please leave a like, comment, subscribe, all that good stuff, and I'll see you in the next one. All right, bye.